with these, thoughts of Dead City Season 2 and just kind of the overall feeling of them forcing things a little bit, things not feeling very natural with this premiere, and just some things that have just been, kind of building up, especially with Daryl Season 2. Some things I've seen have been kind of the same kind of complaints here as Season 2 of Dead City looks to be. It's gotten me thinking about the kind of future of these Walking Dead spin-offs. I guess kind of, the universe as a whole, but specifically these spin-offs to me, because it just feels like we're going kind of in the wrong direction, I would say. And of course, some people, may have just said from the very beginning that these spin-offs were dumb, or that they would get, or that they would go in the wrong direction, or that they would feel forced, for having these spin-offs. And I'm not sure that I really, agreed with that. I think, some of these spin-offs, especially the ones who live, felt like a very necessary thing. Gerald Dixon, not as much, Dead City, not as much, but Dead City Season 1, I think I was a bigger fan of it than most people. I really liked Dead City Season 1. Daryl Season 1 wasn't as big of a fan of it, and Daryl Season 2 was really quite disappointing. And Season 2, to me, of Dead City is not off to a great start. Of course, the ones who live started out good, and it looked good, and then the ending kind of fell through, in the last couple episodes there. So, anyways, I can see why people said that, but to me, I think it's kind of really just setting in now, this feeling, or at least for me, like the feeling of this kind of, we're heading in the wrong direction here. That's really set in for me now after the Season 2 premiere episode of Dead City here. So the focus seems to be more on what would be cool, or, what's the craziest thing, what's the most insane thing that'll get people's attention to see, put to screen with these existing characters that people know from, of course, the original series, like Maggie and Negan, Carol and Daryl, Rick and Michonne, right? All these characters who we've, known from the original series. What would be the craziest situation, or what would be the coolest thing to see? Okay, the craziest situation, yeah, it would be Maggie and Negan somehow teaming up or somehow being together in a series. Okay, that's pretty crazy. What would be cool? To see Daryl in France, or even you could say that was crazy too, to see Daryl in France. Another crazy thing, how does Carol find him? How does Carol then come into the story in France with Daryl? What else would be cool? To see classic Negan again, as we're seeing now in Dead City Season 2. So, to me, that's where the focus seems to be right now with these spin-offs. And I think The Ones Who Live is maybe a different kind of, situation there to me, because again, that felt very necessary, and they had already kind of built that up. Though again, I guess you could say, what would be the crazy thing to see them take out the CRM at the end of The Ones Who Live or something, right? Like, certainly there are some aspects of that as well. But anyways, the focus seems to be more on this, of what's the craziest thing, or what's the coolest thing that we could see these characters in, rather than what makes sense, what's the next chapter of these characters, or what's the next chapter within this apocalyptic world that we've spent so much time in with these characters and these stories, right? What makes sense? What is the next chapter? Where do we go from here, right? It's the focus has now shifted from that. And where, again, like you could maybe say that would be the case for The Ones Who Live, at least at the start of it, right? But now, again, it's just like, oh, what would be cool? Daryl in France, I guess? Or, even in Season 3, I think they've now said they're going to Spain. Daryl in Spain, right? Like, or, Maggie and Negan in New York together. Negan being classic Negan again, right? And so it's just, the focus to me is wrong here. Like, it should be, again, on what's the next chapter for these characters. Does it make sense for Negan to become his old self again, after all these years and after all the buildup that we've had? No, right? Like, it makes sense to see a different version of him. Let's see more of, and again, we saw that in parts of Season 1. I'm sure we'll see that in Season 2. he's going to wrestle with this, and I get that. That's kind of the maybe that's the whole point of where they're going with it. And again, many more episodes to go, and so that could be the case. But it should be more focused on something like that, where, we see the next chapter of Negan's story, we see the next chapter of Maggie, and we've seen hints of that with her and Herschel and her life there. For Daryl, right? Like, what's the next chapter in his story? And then, of course, the other side of this is, if there isn't an interesting next chapter for these characters, maybe we move off of them. Maybe we see different characters that do have an interesting story or another chapter to their story that needs to be told, right? Or even, aside from the characters, what's the next story in this world of The Walking Dead that needs to be explored or that is interesting, right? Rather than, what would be a crazy thing to happen that viewers would be like, just so curious that they'd have to watch it, right? And so to me, this is where the focus seems to be a little, tilted in the wrong direction here. And to me, it's starting to become a bit of a problem, especially after the season 2 premiere of Dead City. I've noticed it. And it's just making me quickly kind of lose interest in this model of, again, the craziness, what would be cool, rather than what makes sense, for this world or for these characters. And it just makes it feel a little forced. And to me, quite honestly, it makes it feel a little cheap. At least, and that's how I've really felt with season 2 premiere Dead City. That's how I felt with season 2 of Daryl Dixon, even season 1, of that, the ending of The Ones Who Live. Again, like, it feels forced to me. It feels like we're forcing these characters into situations where it would just be the coolest thing or like the craziest thing, instead of, again, building a good story, seeing where the next chapter is in this universe. And let's be honest, like, there's so many different directions, so much to go into with this universe, at least in my opinion. Like, obviously some people are just completely checked out and would disagree with that. But to me, as a Walking Dead fan, I think there's tons of, uncharted territory, if you will, to still explore, still lots of areas where you could go into. And they just aren't as interested in that. They're kind of forcing stories here, forcing these characters into situations, and to me it just feels cheap. Like, they're trying to kind of just capitalize on, the fact that we need to see these characters, or that we're so curious to see how Maggie and Negan could possibly be together, or how is it even possible that Daryl goes to France and that Carol now is going to France to find him, right? It just feels cheap. It's not like they've kind of, fully fleshed out a new story or the next thing that kind of makes sense, the next chapter in this universe. And, I have us genuinely interested in this new chapter, something that feels maybe a little more fresh, and we get, interested in that and want to watch that. So that's what I'm feeling right now, and it is making me kind of quickly lose interest, and it's really unfortunate, because I really felt it for, I don't want to say the first time, because season 2 of Daryl Dixon kind of tested me a little bit, but this was like the strongest I felt this, that I've kind of actually started to lose interest here in these spin-offs, and just kind of the future of the universe, and it really is starting to become a problem. So to me, I think maybe it's time for original stories taking place within this world of The Walking Dead, not necessarily involving, Daryl and Carol, or Maggie, Negan, Michonne and Rick. I don't know. Like, is there openings for this? Are there opportunities? I think so. Obviously, it's a lot harder, to get us, invested in a show that we don't have these flagship characters from the original series. But I think that would honestly be more interesting. It would feel more fresh at this point. They did it with World Beyond. Fear the Walking Dead, as it begun, right, with that. I just think there's room for these original stories within the same world, within the same universe, where maybe those would be more interesting at this point, or feel more fresh. And again, I'm not saying that you completely, get rid of what they're doing right now. And obviously, Daryl is probably going to get at least 2 more seasons. Dead City probably another season. Like, they're not going to actually do what I'm saying, right? Or at least not in the short term. But you can do both of these things. You can have original stories taking place, and then you can also have these other spin-offs that are already going. And then the other thing I thought of was maybe do some more prequels to kind of fill in gaps in the story that we've already seen up to this point, right? I really liked that episode in Tales of the Walking Dead where they did Alpha, right? So Alpha, or what was her name in that? Dee, right? In that episode where we saw, kind of this gap in the story where we know where they end up, but we didn't actually really see that on screen. We just kind of heard about it, or maybe we were curious about how this character got to this point, or how did this character meet this character, right? And I think there's tons of opportunity there, and I've talked about this on the channel already, that, Tales of the Walking Dead, a potential season 2 of it, I think there's so much potential there to take this, and even, again, there's more potential there for original stories that are actually good and don't involve time travel and Groundhog Day stuff like we saw in season 1. But anyways, so, there's tons of opportunity there to see kind of prequels or these stories to fill in gaps. And I think that's another direction where they could kind of go in. Again, pretty easy to do that. You do a Tales season 2, and then you kind of, explore some of those. And that would be kind of interesting. And then on the other side of things is, of course, the one final kind of reunion series that we've all kind of wanted, or, especially after The Ones Who Live ended, we've all been kind of looking forward to. And probably at this point, this would probably be the thing to wrap it all up and probably tie a bow on the Walking Dead universe as we know it. And honestly, I hate to say this, I'm a fan, but maybe it is time. Maybe it is time, obviously not, right now, but within the next year or two, to do something like this, to do one final reunion story as kind of a mini-series, right? 8 episodes or 10 episodes or whatever it is. Hopefully more than 6, because I feel like we need a little bit more than that. But maybe it's time, for this mini-series, wrap everything up. We get, Rick, Carol, Daryl, Maggie, Negan. We even bring Morgan in, maybe some of the Fear characters we bring back. Everyone, right? Everyone comes together, in this mini-series. Again, maybe, obviously they're probably not going to be in every episode because that would cost AMC a whole boatload of money to have all these actors back again. Anyways, or maybe they can, save up and push a lot of money into this because the ratings are going to be insane for it. Like, it is what it is. They're kind of cheap, as we've known from their history, but anyways, everyone comes back. They return to defeat, one final kind of big bad, if you will. Maybe that's what they do, or maybe it is really just kind of a reunion type show. Anyways, this is kind of, I think, what we all really want, at the end of the day, at the end of the road here. And the only thing with this, though, is if they are going to do a series like this, this was what the CRM was meant to be, right? It was meant to, all kind of converge into this one final confrontation with this big bad. I mean, really the biggest bad of them all, which was the CRM. And so I'm afraid they've already kind of shot themselves in the foot with that one, though, right? Because of the way that The Ones Who Live ended, and just the absolutely nonsensical, way that went, with the CRM being defeated so easily and so quickly. Not defeated, but, effectively, neutered, if you will. The threat was really kind of, squashed, if you will, at the end of, The Ones Who Live in that episode. And so now they don't even really have the CRM to contend with, right? In this, big final series that they wanted to do that, or they wanted to build up to that. They don't even have the CRM now to do that. And so obviously they can, come up with another big bad that maybe, crosses over between all these spin-off series that we are seeing, and maybe they all come together. I mean, this is what Scott Gimple is paid the big bucks for, to come up with stuff like this, to bring everything together. He's the, chief, content officer, whatever, of the Walking Dead universe. So maybe he could come up with another kind of bigger bad, if you will, and, connect all these stories together and bring it all together in this reunion type miniseries. And again, maybe it's time. Like, maybe it is time to do that. Maybe that's the direction that they should take. Maybe they don't even have to do original stories or do these kind of different prequels, spin-offs, in the future. Maybe it is time to just tie things up after the next seasons of the spin-offs. and really bring it all together in this one reunion series.